Yeah. Comes on like that. And when you finish.
Okay, welcome. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee, including those watching online. Okay. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices via the stairs, either through the security door to the right of the chair here or opposite the lifts in the foyer. Please do not use the lifts. Please assemble in the Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise when it is deemed safe to return to the chamber. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? I would advise that speakers using the microphones are picked up by the cameras recording this meeting, and members of the public in the public gallery behind the speakers may be picked up by those cameras and have their images captured. Any member of the public who objects to the possibility of being filmed may wish to take this opportunity to leave the meeting. Would everyone present please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and that they are not used to make or receive phone calls in the chamber whilst this meeting is in progress. I have the following members who wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1. Items 4A and 4E, Councillor Kay Bright. Item 4E, Councillor Banbridge. And item 4F, Councillor Austin. Would any other members who wish to speak under Council Procedure Rule 20.1 please announce it now? Thank you. The following applications have been reserved for public speaking. Item 4A, 6 to 6A Luton Avenue, Broadstairs. Item 4E, 45 to 45A York Street, Broadstairs. Item 4F, 22 Grosvenor Road, Broadstairs. And item 4G, The Royal, 51 Harbour Place, Ramsgate. I have apologies from Councillor Dennis and Councillor Rattigan, who is substituted by Councillor Linda Wright. Are there any other apologies? No. Are there any declarations of interest? Thank you. Item 3 of the agenda. Do members agree that the minutes of the Planning Committee meeting held on the 19th of July 2023 be approved as a correct record? Do I have a proposer for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Keane. And a seconder? Councillor Matterface. Any site visits will take place for the committee members on the morning of Friday the 1st of September 2023. So, on to public speaking. Agenda item 4A. This is an application for approval, 6 to 6A Luton Avenue. Speaking in favour of this application is Mr Tony Michael. Mr Michael, you have 3 minutes.
Madam Chair, members, officers, good evening. This application has been informed by the previous application and the appeal which was dismissed, and it took these applications to inform this one before you to identify all the issues which have now all been addressed. The officers will explain these. Some will use the dismissed appeal as a negative, but in fact it is a huge positive as it identified all the issues which, as we say, have been addressed. Proof of this is for 2 years the building has been in operation and there has been no enforcement action nor investigations of any kind. It should not be called a HMO. This is the main problem. HMO is a term that people just do not like. It is co-living, a new concept. It's not young people being noisy, causing problems, late night issues. This is doctors, nurses, teachers, civil service, immigration officers, customs and excise. Some sleep during the day as they work night shifts, so it is quiet. The other tenants respect and know this. When the case officer visited for her site visit, she noted how quiet it was. Yes, the report states the occupation cannot be controlled by condition. Correct. But the applicant controls this. This is their business model for quality but affordable housing. There are 4 kitchens, 4 living spaces, large gardens. Every room has an ensuite. These are facts. You may hear opinion and perception from others tonight, like one neighbour who stated, wait till it starts to operate, it will be a nightmare. It has been operating for 2 years. They didn't realise this, so it is not a nightmare. No harm caused in these 2 years of operation. Fact. You may be told of a traffic survey produced by a neighbour, but this is a hatchet job, with all due respect. It hasn't been seen or scrutinised by the Kent Highways Director, who scrutinised our several reports before they would accept and approve them. We have the facts and professional reports. 6 traffic reports in total at different times, 1 sound assessment. Kent Highways Director, no objection. Environmental Services agree with the sound assessment and say it is competently produced. Senior Planning Officer agrees and recommends approval. Signed off and approved by the Principal and Chief Planning Officers. It has a HMO licence by your licensing department. All facts. This application has had a multi-tiered level of professional scrutiny by the professional departments of the Council and Kent County Council. Fact, not just, I don't want it here because it's a HMO. It is not a HMO. It is co-living by sensible, mature persons. To refuse the application before you is to say to doctors, teachers, nurses, essential workers who are on work contracts and not permanently employed, so they cannot obtain mortgages for houses or even rent flats, is to say to them, we don't want you here and we won't support quality and affordable housing for you. I'm sure this is not the message this council wants to project. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaking against the application is Mr. Richie Wilkinson. Mr. Wilkinson, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Council. In April, the planning inspector dismissed an application for a 17-bed HMO on this site on the grounds of 1, the unacceptable effect of living conditions and neighbouring residents, 2, the character and appearance of the area, 3, reduced greenery, 4, significant increase in movement, noise and disturbance from the house and garden, and 5, the rear car park and access adjacent to number 8. The planning inspector states that each of the above reasons is on its own sufficient to dismiss the appeal and concludes that the harm caused by the scheme significantly and demonstrably outweighs any benefits arising from the provision of the HMO. Only the last of these issues has been addressed. Where does the proposal demonstrate respect, enhancement and conservation of the character of the area? Where are the provisions for disabled users? The requirements of HO19, QD02, QD03, BSP9 are still not satisfied. No consideration has been given to the impact of disturbance on neighbours over the last 2 years. There have been late night parties, overflowing waste bins, wheelchair users impeded by cars parked on the pavement. I have had to move my children into another bedroom because of shouting and foul language from the property. What more compelling evidence is needed to show the detrimental effects on this neighbourhood? HO19 is a safeguarding policy, not a target. This building is currently the largest HMO in Broadstairs. This in itself represents a concentration of use. Approval will likely lead to a proliferation of similar applications. The applicant's case relies heavily on the traffic report submitted with the application. We commissioned a professional engineer to review this report. They have questioned the assumptions and conclude that the applicant has significantly underestimated vehicle movement claimed for the HMO. We've also submitted evidence to show that the care home occupancy has been exaggerated by the report. It can be demonstrated that the HMO generates more traffic movement than the care home. There is no discussion of this in the officer's report. The inspector is clear that the harm should not outweigh the benefit of such a scheme. So where is the benefit? Condition 2 proposes that 16 persons should occupy the property as principal or main residents. But the client group currently in the residence are largely contract shift workers whose main addresses are elsewhere. The scheme is therefore not providing respite to a local housing need. Broadstairs neighbourhood plan is clear that appropriate action to bring the building back into use. Appendix 5 supports the conversions of existing houses in multiple occupation into self-contained flats, thus mitigating the risks associated with HMOs. To grant permission for the HMO in these circumstances is a complete repudiation of the policies mandated by referendum and undermines local democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaking under Council Rule 20.1 is Councillor Christian Bright.
Thank you, Chair. I called this in owing to the weight of objections from local residents with over 66 separate letters posted on the planning portal. Let's be clear, this is an HMO, and it being licensed as such should not be seen as material evidence in support of the planning application. There are valid concerns around the appearance of this development, but I'm going to use my 3 minutes to focus on the impact to neighbouring properties. The local plan states that HMO proposals will be permitted where the development does not give rise to an unacceptable impact on the living conditions of neighbouring residents through noise of general disturbance. Likewise, the Broadstairs and St Peter's neighbourhood plan states that consideration will be given to the effect of noise, disturbance, increased parking demand and the like on the local environment. Firstly, traffic and parking. Local residents commissioned their own traffic report, as Richard just said, and corrects errors in the base assumptions made by the developer's report. This survey outlines an increase in traffic and parking due to fewer journeys generated by the previous assisting living home that housed between 9 and 11 elderly residents, and more journeys, 44 compared to 17, generated by the proposed development, being more akin to private flats than local authority housing. As this property already operates as an HMO, we already know the impact that this change of use has on neighbours' living conditions. They can't sleep. HMO residents are shift workers and are coming and going throughout the night and early hours. This means associated traffic and conversations between residents and completely negates the soundscape survey provided by the developer, as there is no background noise at 2 a.m. The footfall also triggers overly bright security lighting, which shines directly into neighbouring houses. Neighbours haven't been able to enjoy their gardens due to loud music and antisocial behaviour by the residents of this HMO. Complaints were made directly to the developer about this. Workers for the developer also destroyed the mature hedge, which formed the boundary to number 8, and whose ownership at the time was still being disputed. These factors have been so disruptive that neighbours at number 8 have had to move their children's bedrooms as they couldn't sleep through the disturbances. This alone represents the very definition of unacceptable impact and is totally at odds with the inspector's contention that there is no significant change in living amenity for neighbouring property occupiers. This application remains contrary to both the Thanet local and Broadstairs and St Peter's neighbourhood plans. Its scale, nature and design is just not in keeping with the area, and by removing just a single room from the previous failed applications, this developer is showing scant regard for neighbours' concerns. I strongly recommend that this committee refuses permission in this case.
Thank you. The Planning Applications Manager will now outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an aerial view of of Luton Avenue and surrounding roads. So the application proposes the change of use of numbers 6 and 6A. Just to be clear, the properties are actually attached, physically attached to this is the GIS map, which hasn't been updated, but the building, as you'll see, is attached to, they're attached to each other, and it's to change it to a 16-bed HMO. So you've already heard about a number of the issues that have come up from the planning history of this case. Specifically, the main issue for members to consider is policy HO19 of the local plan, and that states that the council should permit housing multiple occupation where, and I'll just read out the criteria, so it wouldn't give rise in terms of the impact on living conditions of neighbouring residents through noise or general disturbance, that it wouldn't result in intensification or concentration of such uses detrimental to the amenity and character of the neighbourhood, that it provides suitable car parking or adequate on-street parking is available within the vicinity of the site, and it provides suitable bin storage. So we've already had mention of the previous application that was refused for a 17-bed HMO. I think it's just worth reading out these reasons for refusal for relevance. So the first reason that the previous application was refused for was that the proposed change of use by virtue of the increased demand for parking, number of residents and restricted parking area would result in additional parking pressure on the area where there is reduced on-street parking provision, significantly harmful to parking amenity in the area and contrary to the relevant policies, and that the proposed use by virtue of the location and proximity of the parking area and the side entrance door to the boundary of number 8 Luton Avenue would result in a significant increase in noise and disturbance to the neighbouring residential property, causing significant harm to the living amenity. Now, members will have seen, because it's Annex 1 in the report, the inspector's decision subsequently. So this is relevant because it dismissed and detailed some concerns in a bit more detail. So it talked about movement to and from the premises, and that would result in noise and disturbance from the house and garden in a quiet residential area as defined. It specifically looked at the impact on number 8 and identified the rear parking area and the door, but mainly the parking area, to be an impact. And then there were other impacts on the appearance on the street scene and the character of the area from the parking area in itself and the removal of the landscaping that had occurred. The appeal decision does not talk about on-street parking. So just it is relevant that it doesn't mention that. Obviously the reason for refusal though has been looked to be addressed. So just to go through some of the images of the site. So the big red dot is on the right hand side of the two properties. and then this is the current view of the properties this is actually from November 2022, as you can see on the top right-hand corner. So you've got the two properties there. You can see where there is a route down the side of the property on the left-hand side, parking area at the front, and then you can actually see the side door, which we'll talk about in a minute here. And we've got another image from the other side, and then I've just got a couple of images of the front. And then this is looking down, so number 8 is on your left as you look at it. And this is the rear parking area, which we'll come on to in a minute. And then this is on the right-hand side, looking down the side alley. This is the rear of the premises, so we are the left-hand side at the back, but the right-hand side at the front, looking back to the property. And you can see there's a fence that's been erected on the right-hand side. And this is here. And then this, as it stands, is the other side of that fence in the parking area that's being utilised at the moment with the protected tree at the rear. So turning, sorry, this is just to show again a bit more detail of that parking area. And then this is looking back towards the side elevation of number 8. And then this is the side door of the property that we'll talk about. So, the main changes that have changed from the previous application to this one is the reduction from 17 to 16 people, the removal of this parking area, so this is proposed to be removed and landscaped with a new gate and fence to be erected next to the access door on the side. It also includes a change at the front to be grassed to change from the sort of slate shingle that's at the front at the moment. It is proposed that the side door would be designated as a fire door, and we'll show on the floor plans that that's proposed to be restricted in terms of entry and exit. And there's also, obviously, by virtue of the removal of the on-site parking as well, you've also got a change to the fence at the rear here to open up that garden area. So, in terms of the existing ground floor plan, as mentioned, this site is in operation. I do think it's important just to note the points that have been raised about the licence process for licensing an HMO. That is entirely separate from the planning process and shouldn't be taken into account in terms of the specific determinations that you have to make under policy for a planning application. In addition, in terms of any enforcement action not being taken, you will note from the front page of the appeal decision in terms of when the decision was issued and then when the appeal was actually issued. There was a very significant time period before the appeal was actually issued. And as members will know, we hold any enforcement action in abeyance whilst a planning appeal is going on, because obviously we don't want to take action when an inspector can then obviously approve something, and then we are liable for all the costs of taking that action. So you've currently got upstairs a total number of rooms. Now, in this rear area here, what's been proposed is that it becomes one bedroom in this area. But what I want to talk about now is this is the ground floor plan. So in terms of the side door, this is identified obviously in the previous decision by the council as an issue. And what's being proposed is that there would be a control on that use of that door, that it would only open in the activation of the fire alarm by an electromagnetic door release. Now, I don't believe that is currently in situ. However, irrespective of whether or not it is or isn't, there is a proposed planning condition, which is condition 9, which would require, if this was approved within a set time frame, details of the mechanism that would be put into that fire escape door to be approved and then maintained subsequently. So that's a condition that we would propose to go on the application if it were to be approved. In terms of the impact on noise to residents, the applicant has submitted a noise assessment, and obviously you've heard some of the views with regards to that noise assessment. I do think it's important to draw members' attention to the comments of the Environmental Health Officer, who has looked at the noise assessment and does consider it to be sound in what it is assessing, which does show that the background noise level when those studies were taken was predominantly created by the noise from the road. Obviously, it is inevitable that some noise is not going to be captured by a noise assessment. What the main change, though, that has occurred from one proposal to another here is the removal of the rear parking area, which means that no cars would be going down the side access of number 8. So that does reduce the amount of noise, clearly, which will be exacerbated and has been clearly occurring with regards to the parking area at the rear being used at different times of day. That would be removed. In addition, the restriction on the use of that side access, from now onwards, if permission were to be granted, would look to remove then that being used as a frequent method of access. And you can see on this plan there is a main access in the middle of the property which would then be used by the 16 occupants. So the environmental health officer has concluded that it's not considered that the comings and goings from the site would make a significant difference to the background noise level on the basis of the evidence that's been submitted. Now, this is just the first floor plan and shows the bedroom at the back, as I mentioned, that's now a single bedroom. So in terms of traffic, you've heard that there's a submission of information that's been done to do with the amount of movements that were created by the previous use of the building and then the new use of the building. And as you'll see from the officer report, it acknowledges that there would be an increase in on-street parking from the proposed use. That was our stance previously, and it's still our stance now. What we didn't have with the previous application is the evidence that has been submitted by the applicant and has been assessed by KCC Highways. So on the image on your left is looking at the areas which were looked at specifically by the survey that was done. So the roads in red were looked at in terms of what parking is present on street, and the image on the right looks at where there are restrictions on the ability to park on street. So you won't be able to see it in a lot of detail, but every single line on that road, or where there is a measurement, is where there is a dropped curb, and there are single yellow lines, or indeed there's a long blue line that goes along the Vale, which is basically saying you cannot park here, because anyone that's driven along the Vale will know you can't park on both sides of that road, it's too narrow. What that parking survey demonstrated was initially the parking survey was done on a Wednesday and Thursday, 26th and 27th of April. KCC put in an initial objection to the survey work that had been done and actually asked for the reinstatement of parking at the rear, but further evidence was provided with a Saturday survey, Saturday the 8th of July, which was put in with a midday survey and a 2 p.m. survey and a midnight survey. And this identified, as the previous surveys did, that there were spaces in the vicinity, both at night time and daytime, and the figures are within the report. Now, KCC have looked through that, and they've considered this in the round, given that the site is in a sustainable location. It's 10 minutes walk away from the station, it's close to a bus route, and it was not considered, given the evidence that's been submitted, that there would be a significantly detrimental impact on highway safety by virtue of the amount of parking that would be created by the use, and that would be able to be accommodated within the streets surrounding. In terms of the query about the number of movements created by the use, the main issue created by the use is actually the parking, rather necessarily than the movements. If there was still a rear parking area, the number of movements is absolutely an issue, because then you're looking at the number of movements adjacent to the neighbours. In this instance, it's about actually how much parking is available in the area and whether or not that can accommodate the 16 residents. If they all had a car, can they park in the area? And the view of KCC Highways, and indeed backed up by officers, is that in our view, that is possible to happen without causing any highway safety concerns, specifically due to the number. Obviously, concerns been raised about how people park. That, unfortunately, isn't something that can be taken into account. That's an individual, that could happen irrespective of the accommodation. It's about whether or not the situation itself creates a problem in particular streets because there are too much on-street parking, and that's not borne out by the evidence that we have in front of us. Now, this is a tricky case by virtue of I'll just skip through these photos. If we need to come back to those, we can. This is a tricky case because you've seen, obviously, there are significant concerns about the use of the building that have been addressed. There have been changes made to the proposal. It is very clearly dealing with some of the issues that were raised previously. And we do consider, as officers, that the additional evidence that's been submitted does demonstrate that it overcomes the issues raised by the previous refusal. It does deal with a number of the issues raised by the inspector, and a combination of the removal of the parking area, the restriction on the fire escape, and the additional evidence that's been produced with regards to the noise report, that it does overcome the reasons raised by the inspector as well. Now, on balance, therefore, it is recommended for approval. That is subject to a number of safeguarding conditions, which does include reinstatement or instatement of the landscaping. In terms of the fence, there's a restriction on the occupancy to 16 individuals, and obviously the restrictions on the actual fire escape door on the side. And so we do think it complies with policy HO19 and BSP 9 of the neighbourhood plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Can the Vice Chair please second that?
Seconded.
Sorry. I pressed it and it was off. So now open for debate. Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's indeed a very, very difficult application to decide upon. The fact that the buildings
Sorry,
have been operating...
Councillor Bayford, could you just move your microphone down towards you a little bit, bend it a little bit?
Is that okay? Is that better?
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. The fact, I think it is a very difficult one to decide. The fact that the buildings have been operating for 2 years with few issues, to the point where many residents didn't even know that it was acting as an HMO, I think is quite important. I think HMOs are essential in providing affordable housing for people who need it, including professionals who we do need to attract to the area. I can't see why the traffic movement would increase, and in fact the environmental officer has, sorry, health officer says that the noise level is from the road. Changes have been made to address the issues raised. I'm unsure, but I generally feel that I'm in support of this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Alban.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Bayford in that it is a difficult one to determine. If this was a 6-bed, most HMOs within Thanet are less than 10, probably 6 on average. You know, a house converted into 6. Fair enough, and we do need those type of we do need that kind of availability. Co-living, no. HMO, yes. I do take into account what the agent for the applicant was saying about doctors, nurses and other professionals. However, I do know that doctors, nurses and other professionals do like to get carried away, and they're like every other person on this planet, and they're not all meek and quiet and whatever. So, you know, that's just for want of a better phrase, that's a red herring. Also, we're talking 16 single people. Come on, not going to be 16 single people, is it? Don't they have a life, these people? Don't they have partners, or don't they go... No, it's going to be more than that. You could double that. You could double that. So you could be looking at 32 people living here. It's too many people in one location for it to be quiet. I'm sorry, but that is the case. You know, that's just being human. You know, if you're a lot of people in one place, then it's not going to be a quiet place, is it? I have to say, the building looks very well kept. It looks in good condition. And if it had come in for self-contained flats, then I think that would be far, far better than this use. However, I wish to hear what other members have to say. Thank you, Chair.
Just come back to Mr Livingstone for a moment.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, to your point, Councillor Orban, I agree that there's nothing that precludes guests visiting people that live there. That is true. In terms of the condition, it's requiring that no more than 16 persons should occupy the property as the principal or main residence at any one time. But to your point, yes, that doesn't preclude people staying there as not their principal resident.
Councillor Councillor Alban, come back.
Yeah, I understand that. However, human nature, who's going to, is that a condition on the planning consent that there should only be 16 people in residence?
Yes, it's condition 2.
Okay, who's going to enforce that?
That would be us as the local planning authority.
Yeah, you're not going to visit there on a very regular basis, are you?
So I'm definitely not going to talk about planning enforcement with Councillor Orban, particularly on this, but I would say that obviously if there was a breach or a concern was raised that this was being breached, then obviously there are lots of tools that we would have, such as a planning contravention notice, which would obviously require information, requisition of information. But as you say, it's a priority service, so it would just I think it's an enforceable condition. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Matterface.
Thank you, Chair. When this was an Abbeyfield assisted living, there were, I think, 10 or 11 individual little flats there. I think that is an enormous difference going from a dozen or so elderly or disabled people who tended to be less mobile. I think going from that number to 16, quite honestly, is a step too far. And they would, I know there was a traffic survey and there were some movements. Yes, there would have been visitors, there would have been carers coming in, but that is a vast difference between 16 people driving to and from work, and I'm going to find it difficult to support this. I know this area well, and parking there at any point, particularly when the schools are operating, East Kent College, Broadstairs College now is operating, that area is heavily parked up because, as has been said, a lot of the properties have dropped curbs. I think it's going to be very difficult for these people to find somewhere on the street to park, and I think that is it's a step too far.
Thank you. Councillor Keane.
Thank you. I'm concerned about the quality of it because of the number of flatlets, whatever one calls them, in there. I mean, I'm looking at the on the left-hand side, the top bedroom. Well, the door from the shower area practically hits the diagram of the bed. I mean, it doesn't seem a very spacious area at all. I presume there are minimum standards and I presume it meets them. But that's my concern, is it really providing quality accommodation for people?
Thank you, Chair. So in policy QDO4, which is the technical standards under the nationally described space standards, that doesn't cover HMOs. What we've previously looked at with HMOs is whether or not you have communal areas, you have kitchens, and obviously you have appropriate bathroom facilities. Often that does, though, relate to much smaller HMOs, and those sorts of proposals have been in front of members before when there's a question over, is it acceptable to have 3 beds or a 4-bed property, depending on if there's a lounge, etc. So we consider that, even though obviously you point out that the one on the left and at the top, the individual rooms are all quite spacious for individual rooms, but also there are communal areas, and you can see there are 2 lounge areas that are present on this floor alone. There is, as I mentioned, the separate requirement, very much separate, the HMO licensing requirement, which more looks at number of kitchens per bedroom and number of bathrooms per bedroom, that sort of thing. But in terms of the standard of accommodation, we do consider this to be acceptable when looking at it, comparing it really to flat conversion standards in terms of how big bedrooms are. It's sufficient.
Councillor Wing. Oh, Councillor Garner, you can go first. Councillor Garner.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I've listened with interest to what people have said about this and to what the agent and the resident have said. And I think because this is a similar application has been considered and refused previously and gone to appeal, and the refusal upheld by the inspector, I'm sort of guided by the inspector's report on this in my thinking. And as has been mentioned, the inspector came up with 3 different reasons why the refusal was upheld, and then said, as was mentioned, each of these reasons on its own is sufficient to dismiss the appeal. So to my mind, that means that each of those 3 reasons has to be satisfied to enable this to be approved. Now, the second about the parking, we can agree or disagree on whether the new arrangements to move parking completely off-site onto the road continues to be unneighbourly. As the inspector said, the partial parking is something that can be argued, and significantly reducing the amount of greenery in the back garden. That is, again, by taking away the car park, and you are potentially satisfying that reason for refusal. The main reason that I really am struggling with, and that I can't see we'll get round, is that by having 17 residents occupying these houses, the noise generated by a care home would be normally expected to be reasonably subdued. The introduction of 17 individuals into an HMO in a quiet street will be likely to generate significantly more movement to and from the premises, as well as noise and disturbance. So the way that this reason is being satisfied is by reducing that number for 17 to 16. And to argue that that fully satisfies that will no longer be generating unacceptable noise, I find extremely difficult to agree with. And unless someone here can satisfy me that is the case, then I'm going to struggle to agree to approve this application. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Wing.
Like Councillor Alban has said, normally you get a single dwelling with 5 or 6, maybe four units. Here we've got 2 units, 2 properties side by side, which just further impacts on the neighbours. 16 beds, 32 people, could be visitors also with cars that are parking on the street. I just think it's overdevelopment. It would have been nice to have seen them as units, flat units that we desperately need as well. I just find it quite difficult that the noise assessment wasn't undertaken during the night, when we all know the slightest drop of a pin or a conversation on the street actually is very loud if you're indoors. It certainly happens on my street quite a lot. And we haven't got a HMO. But I don't know, I find it difficult. If there'd have been one property, it would have been better. It just seems there's so much of it there, all in one place, on a street that's not used to this number of adults living in one property, active adults, active working adults that are to and from and busy and do what adults do. So I'm going to struggle as well, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Councillor Uzeki.
Mine's a question actually for Ian. They stated that this has been operating for 2 years. Have you actually had any complaints, noise complaints, come through the council that you know of?
I'm afraid I can't speak to that with regards to environmental health, in case they had received anything as a sort of statutory nuisance complaint. Obviously, this is a slightly unique case because of the fact that the previous proposal was at appeal. So obviously any sort of complaints with regards to enforcement about any impact would be effectively, the response would be, we have to hold action in abeyance until the appeal is determined. So it's difficult to say in terms of whether or not we've got any recorded complaints to that effect.
Councillor Bayford, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to address the issue of the spaciousness of the accommodation, people need affordable accommodation. Some people need to professional people in particular, need to have a place to live that they can afford. We cannot always have spacious accommodation. I think sometimes we look to build too many places that are unaffordable. So that is another reason why I think perhaps HMOs are very, very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I'm just coming in on one point raised earlier. The noise information did look at background noise level in terms of at night time, just so that that's clear. However, I do think it's important that this was taken at a specific time in, I think it's May this year. So I think given the way that this property's been occupied, and obviously which happens with every HMO in terms of it can vary depending on who the individuals are, I think that's where there might be some disparity in how much noise is created by different movements at different times of day. But I just wanted to just make that clear in terms of the evidence that's been put forward, that's been looked at by environmental health, was on that basis. Thank you.
Do I have any other speakers? Councillor Bright.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a question, really. So how can we guarantee that the fire door will definitely only be used as an exit in the event of an emergency? And also, I was actually quite shocked at the sort of the way the landscaping has been managed. To be honest, the fact that, I saw before and after pictures, and that used to be a very beautiful front garden with a hedge, and it just looks quite brutal, to be honest. How can we guarantee as well that that's going to be a beautifully landscaped garden as it was before? At the moment it's just hardcore, and I know that QDO2 says something about design, and I certainly don't think that it enhances the character of the area in its current state. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so the first point with regards to the fire escape door, so condition 9 identifies that the door has got to be fitted with a mechanism that only allows opening in the event of activation of the fire alarm, and with details submitted for the local authority's approval within 1 month of a decision, if it were to be approved, which would have to also include a timetable for installation, and then it's got to be fitted in accordance with the details and maintained in good working order. And as we've included the statement to be used only in the event of an emergency. Fundamentally, it's a deterrent in terms of avoiding the fire alarm going off. If the fire alarm keeps going off, there may well be other statutory nuisance issues that could be looked at. It is a deterrent in terms of its use, and obviously I'm sure that the applicant would know that we are going to get multiple complaints if it keeps going off to the council by residents. And obviously we, as the both in terms of environmental health and obviously planning, would then be very much looking at whether or not there's a breach of the condition, or indeed there's a statutory nuisance issue. In terms of the landscaping, absolutely agree, the current situation is unacceptable. What they are proposing to do, however, is to landscape both of those areas which were created as they were. Condition 6 requires details of that landscaping, because we have the details that you can see there on the plan in terms of grass, but we don't have the tree species or the shrub species, and that would have to be submitted within 3 months of the decision. We then, once that's been agreed and then completed, we need photographic evidence to be submitted as part of that condition, and we also require a landscape management plan to be submitted, which is under condition 8, which would actually outline very clearly about how they intend to maintain that over a prolonged time period from then on. So again, if that doesn't happen, it's a breach of condition, and therefore it's a potential breach of condition notice. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Moore.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to fall in line with Councillor Garner. on the inspectorate's 3 points. As we've just heard that 2 of those points have been covered, but the last one being the numbers, it only being reduced by 1, I too have the same concern. And also have a question regarding the hedge at the front of the building. Was that dispute of ownership ever resolved? And if so, is it going to be replaced?
I'm sorry, I realised I've had my microphone on. I don't know, but it's irrelevant in terms of the planning determination. I think is the main thing. It's a separate civil matter in terms of the ownership, so it couldn't be taken into account with the decision.
Councillor Matterface.
I'd just like to come back, quoting from the inspector's report, because much has been made about its extra housing units. He says, the existing care home also provides a housing resource, which I think was for about 11 and maybe 12 people. And the harm caused by the scheme significantly and demonstrably outweighs any benefit arising from the provision of the HMO. So basically, looking as it was before as an Abbeyfield with 11 or 12 and now 16, it's only actually adding 4 or 5 more units, isn't it? And working out the percentage, going from 17 to 16 is only a 6% reduction. It's a tiny reduction by comparison. So instead of having 12 elderly people living there, you might have 16 professional people, which is +4.
Councillor Wing.
Just clarification over the fire door. Does the fire door, when it's open, trigger the alarm, or does the alarm trigger the fire door opening?
Well, we'll be getting details of the mechanism in. However, the expectation would be you can't open the door unless the fire alarm is triggered. No, you can't open the door unless the fire alarm is activated. So rather than the idea of you push the door and the fire alarm goes off, because that would be obviously problematic.
Okay, do I have any other questions or comments? Councillor Moore.
Yes, Chair, just to make a point that those fire doors can be overpowered just by pushing hard. Those magnetic locks are not that secure, and that's 30 years' experience.
All right, and looks like I don't have any more, so we will now put the motion for the officer's recommendation for approval to the vote. Can I have those who vote in favour, please? And those against? Thank you.
Any abstentions?
Yeah, did I have any abstentions? No abstentions.
Okay, so 8 against.
Sorry, the motion is lost. What we now have to do is hand back to Mr Livingstone because we will need to produce another motion. Thank you.
Okay, so I've heard obviously the issues that members have raised, and obviously as mentioned it was a balanced case. Obviously taking account of the information that's been submitted has clearly been understood by members in terms of the changes that were made to the proposal, and in terms of the previous reasons for refusal and then the subsequent inspector's decision, and taking all of that together, and I think that's really important. It's not just about overcoming the planning, the council's decision, but it's about taking account of the inspector's decision as mentioned by Councillor Garner and then subsequently mentioned by others about what's changed. Specifically, the reason for refusal that the council put forward related to the impact on number 8 with regards to the door and the parking area. However, as read out, paragraph 3 of the inspector's decision talks specifically more generally about the noise impact of having at that point 17 people. And it's not, I think the important thing here is it's not just necessarily more movement to and from the premises, but where it states as well as noise and disturbance from the house and garden. In terms of the other elements of the refusal previously, I think certainly in officers' view, there is considered to be sufficient capacity in the area to accommodate for this in terms of parking. And again, the site is a sustainable location in terms of ability of people to walk to the station. I think, therefore, the main issue that members have raised really is about the increased activity from the users of the HMO, because there are 16 users of the HMO, even given the changes that have been made. And so I don't know whether or not, if the chair agrees, it might be worth a brief adjournment for anyone that wants to come up here to discuss a potential motion to put forward to members.
Yeah, I certainly agree with a brief adjournment. Would anyone who wants to input to the revised motion please come forward? Thank you. We have got a revised motion to bring before members, but we have a missing member, so we're just waiting for Councillor Makinson to return to the chamber. So, oh, and here she is. Thank you. Okay. Now we have a full complement again. I will hand over to Mr. Livingstone again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, discussion focused around the issues that members have raised and specific reference to the inspector's decision, taking account of the previous council decision. And it's considered that the following motion be put before members to refuse the application on the following ground: that the proposed change of use by virtue of the increased activity from the users of the HMO would result in a detrimental increase in noise and disturbance to neighbouring residential properties, causing harm to the living conditions of the occupiers and character of the area, contrary to policies HO19 and QD03 of the Thanet Local Plan, policy BSP9 of the Broadstairs and St Peters Neighbourhood Plan, paragraph 130 of the National Planning Policy Framework.
Can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Alban.
I'll propose that, Chair.
Seconder, Councillor Garner. Thank you. And can I have votes in favour of that, please? And those against? Thank you, that's carried. Were there any abstentions?
There was 2 abstentions.
Sorry, we had 2 abstentions, that's carried. Okay, that's the end of that item. I realise there are quite a few people in the gallery who were here for that item. You can stay or you can leave. It's entirely up to you. So if you want to carry on listening to what follows, that's fine, but you don't have to. I'll just pause a minute while we have a mass exodus. Okay, thank you. Agenda item 4, 45 to 45A York Street, sorry?
Item 4E.
Sorry, 4E.
Yeah.
I've just been corrected. Item 4E. 45 to 45A York Street. Speaking in favour of the application is Mr. Tony Michael. 3 minutes.
Madam Chair, I'm not actually speaking in favour of it. Councillor Banbridge is.
Fair enough. In that case, Councillor Banbridge.
Thank you, Chair. So, I'm here to talk on the Little Sicilian. You're going to be asked to judge whether the existing flue belonging to the Little Sicilian restaurant in Broadstairs is disruptive, obtrusive and out of keeping with the street scene. I hope that you had a chance to look at the photos that I sent you earlier to see this isn't actually the case and that the flue is hardly noticeable at all. The report states that Environmental Health have no objections as they have accepted the specifications of the flue, are compliant with odour and noise control. Broadstairs Town Council have no objection, nor does the Broadstairs Society. This must indicate to you that the flue is absolutely fine and does not in any way harm the conservation area. The flue installation was an honest mix-up. The Italian owners of the restaurant were somewhat misled by the flue company and did not realise that the larger flue was being installed. However, this flue is fine and has been in place one and a half years, and there were no additional complaints from the public domain since the initial complaint from the neighbour. This objection is just on the appearance, as per the report. The report states that the extraction system, by virtue of its size and prominent siting, is an unduly disruptive, obtrusive and incongruous feature unrelated to and out of keeping with the established street scene, to the detriment of the character and visual amenities of the conservation area and detrimental to the visual amenities enjoyed by the occupiers of adjoining properties. The flue is none of these things. And just to remind you, there's always been a flue to this building. There's always been a cafe or restaurant here. The report says that the bamboo screen used to ameliorate this is not acceptable as it's not permanent and it has to be maintained. Well, this bamboo screening is a principle that's been accepted in many other cases to screen buildings. For example, the harbour view next to the Tartar frigate, bamboo is accepted to screen an entire building, and they now say it's not acceptable to screen a small flue. So where is the consistency here? The flue cannot be seen, and it is in no way disruptive or prominent. It is set back from the side street. This business doesn't need the cost of extracting the existing flue and installing a smaller flue when the flue is actually fine as it is. Also, the suggestion to paint it black, as the report states, wouldn't be a good idea, as this would make it more visible. As a silver flue, it blends in with the background and sky, so it's hardly noticeable. You can see for yourself if you wish to make a site visit, but honestly, I don't really think a site visit is necessary if you've been able to look at the pictures. I hope you recognise that there really isn't a problem here. The Little Sicilian is a hard-working small business that deserves our support in hard times, so a lot of hospitality businesses are closing their doors. We don't want to put this business under any more unnecessary pressure. That said, I hope you as a committee are in agreement with me and will go against the officer's recommendation to refuse permission. Thank you.
Thank you. Speaking under Council Rule 20.1 is Councillor Christian Bright. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief on this. I wanted to speak on this as it was something I did pick up during the local campaign, the local election campaigning, and it was specifically talking about the flue itself with the next door neighbour who told me at the time that her enjoyment of their property has been negatively impacted by the presence of the flue, both in terms of the view and the visual amenity and the odours within her house. I agree with the recommendation of refusal on the grounds that due to its size, this flue is detrimental to the visual amenity of the Broadstairs Conservation Area. The attempts to hide the flue, while laudable, are inappropriate and inadequate with no permanent fixture or planting plan. I think the applicant needs to think again about this and recommend the committee supports the officer's recommendation and refuses the application. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. The Principal Planning Officer will now outline the report.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So this is the application site, which it outlined in red here at the corner of York Street and Oscar Road. Again, this is enough of view of the application site, and the area we're talking about is the area hatched in blue here, so it fronts onto Oscar Road. So this is, again, an aerial photograph, and this is the application site here, and the area we're talking about is in this location here. As has been mentioned, this is a site in the Broadstairs Conservation Area, so it is expected to either enhance or at least maintain the character and appearance and the special features of that conservation area. And as you can see, this is the application site here, and as you'll note, it's the surrounding areas, a variety of residential and commercial premises. And the application before members tonight is part retrospective, and it's for the erection of the extraction system and flue with freestanding bamboo screening, which has been mentioned by speakers already, to the north, the northern and eastern edges of the roof extension, and a regularisation of the existing handrail. So we'll just look at some photographs of the site. These are, I think some photographs, newer photographs have been circulated to members, which now include screening along the frontage of the site here, but these were taken a little while ago, but you can see the screening, the bamboo screening to the side here. So this extension was granted in 2022, and it was meant to have an internal flue, and that's what's been mentioned by Councillor Banbridge about the mix-up, and it was put on, and we are looking at it as being partly retrospective, but it is to maintain the flue. So that's enough a view of it. And again, a close-up view of this flue here. And as you can see, it is silver in appearance, metallic. It doesn't, in officers' opinion, blend with the sort of subservient nature of the wooden extension or the surrounding sort of more traditional buildings in the area. And just to give you an idea of measurements of that flue, it is 0.5 metres in diameter and has a total length of 9.96 metres, of which 6.35 metres runs along the boundary of 43B York Street, and 3.61 metres runs opposite along the extension line, directly in line with the Oscar Road, number 3. So, again, enough a view of it, and you can see the bamboo screening here, but members, just to point out, there is some gaps in the screening, and it is not, officers are concerned that that screening may not be sufficient to totally cover the flue unless it is very well managed. And that's just enough of you, again, where you can see the screening isn't, totally covering it as yet, albeit that we are aware it is only been recently sort of put in. And that's enough of you. That's actually taken from Street View. And sorry. Yeah, that's all. I was about to say that.
At the end, I've added the photo.
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry. This is a photo that was taken before any screening was in place. So you can see it hasn't got it, but you can see it is quite noticeable in its silver colour, certainly in officers' opinion, and we do raise concerns about the impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area. So just looking at some elevations, this is the elevation as existing. It's slightly wrong in that the flue is in existence, but, so apologies if I'm not talking correctly into the microphone. As I say, this is the existing front elevation that's been provided by the agent. As I say, it's slightly misleading because the flue obviously is in existence and was before the application was put in. But if we go to the proposed front elevation, this is showing it with the screening in place to the front. So it is showing in this instance that it would be covered by the screening and you would not see it from standing in Oscar Road. You also note from the annotations and the report that the proposal is to paint the flue and the extraction pipes and ducting black. So in an attempt to further blend it in so it have more in common with the building it sits on. So this is the existing side elevation, again slightly odd without showing the flue that is in existence, but this is where we've looked at photographs. This is showing the bamboo planting there. This is the rear elevation, and this is the proposed rear elevation. So just a quick look at some floor plans. This was before the extension was in place, actually, so it was used for bin storage and other things associated with the restaurant. This is the extension here in that yard where we saw the bins, and the bin storage is now in location here. This is the existing first floor plan, so it had some tables, an office, etc. for the management, and again this is the same first floor plan, but you can see the extension down here. So it really is for members to, as has been mentioned, to decide whether this flue can be adequately screened by bamboo screening or painting it black, and whether it is detrimental to the character and appearance of the conservation area. Officers are of the opinion it does not enhance or preserve the character and appearance of the conservation area, and it is highly visible, and whilst we have sympathies with the owners of the restaurants and obviously their need to continue their business, there was an internal system that was going to be put into the extension originally. So whilst environmental health do not raise an objection, officers do from a viewpoint of the character and appearance of the area, and that it is detrimental to the special and historic and architectural importance of the conservation area. Sorry, how are they?
Do you want to click on one and pass it to me?
Oh,
I've
sorry.
seen the screen now. Sorry, a bit slightly unique. I'm just going to present my screen now because we've got the photos in, which are more up to date. So I think it is important for members to see those. So if you bear with me a second. That is the image that's been provided, which obviously shows the screening at the front. I do just want to confirm something which I've just been looking through the design nexus statement, just on this confusion about painting the flue. I'm going to do something that I wouldn't normally suggest doing, and I'm actually going to look at Mr. Michael and just ask him to confirm or not whether or not actually the proposal was to paint the flue or not, because I've reread the design nexus statement and it's to paint the railings, the spiral staircase on the left of this image and the railing black, but I don't think it includes painting the flue in the design nexus statement.
I think on the drawing it states that we would paint the flue, and of course we would paint the flue if this is what the officers required. So I think it's on the drawings.
Sorry, it's just there's a gap on the drawing, and so I just wanted to just ascertain that definitely for members, so everyone was absolutely clear on what was being considered. Thank you for that, I appreciate it. So yeah, just to show members this image, but again, this is obviously what's being proposed in front of members in terms of the screening, and the officer recommendation is for refusal.
Okay, I was just checking what was going on there.
That's fine.
Right, in that case, I move that the officer's recommendation is adopted. Could the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. I've got lots of hands up going up. So I saw Councillor Matterface first. Sorry, I've got a whole lot. So I'm going to start with Councillor Matterface.
Thank you, Chair. This is a horizontal flue. I've got 2 or 3 questions. One is there any reason why there can't be an external vertical flue at the back of the property? Second question, you mentioned an internal system. Would that be a fallback position if this refusal goes through? And this is discharging straight into the street at a height of what 7 or 8 feet, which is not very pleasant for the people in Oscar Road. And my last point I want to make is bamboo requires quite a lot of depth, and it looks to me that those planters are quite shallow. So I have no idea how long that bamboo would survive up there, particularly in our current rather dry climate. So why not vertical? Is there a fallback position? Discharging to the street can't be very, very pleasant, and also I don't think the bamboo planter's the right depth.
Right, I saw Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think that the pictures shown now are very different to those that we saw previously. This is a thriving business, and I think that every move possible has been made to comply with the requirements of the conservation area. I think it's very harsh to refuse this. Thank you.
Councillor Wing.
I'm a bit confused because the original planning application for the extension had the flue inside the building. So how do you forget to put the flue inside the building, and then you end up with this thing on the top of the building that, quite frankly, if it was in Margate, it'd be a really good piece of artwork for everybody to look at. But I'm quite confused that you can, obviously I had my own building recently, that you can forget something as significant as a flue that large. You can forget to put it inside the building. We had a similar thing, well, not a similar thing, on Charlotte Court in Ramsgate, where the company just decided to smash through the wall and put a flue in Charlotte Court, which was a prime area, prime location. They should have just followed and done what they did in their original planning application, then I'm sure we wouldn't be here wasting time.
Councillor Makinson? No? Was there anyone else? Councillor Orban.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. again, about whether it should be inside or outside, if it was to be inside, and just remind me if I got it wrong, but I believe that the company who put it in, or were doing the flue, put it on the outside instead of on the inside. I think if that was my memories right. So the issue really, if that is the case, is between the owner and the people who put the extractor up. Instead of just accepting it, if I was the owner of that, I want them to put it where it should be in the first place, not where they decided it was going to go. So I wasn't sure if it was Councillor Banbridge who actually said that or not. But anyway, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Moore, did you? No? Okay, I'm getting duff steers over here. Councillor Keane.
Just wanted to say this is a conservation area, and I mean, what does it mean if we let something like this stay in the area?
Now, Councillor Moore.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair, this is not the first time this has happened in Broadstairs with extraction systems, and there have been retrospective applications for this likewise, and they have, by the size of it, it's difficult to reduce it in size, I think, but they have been screened more adequately and made to blend in with its surroundings. It's unfortunate that it's not internal as it was originally. I think it would be quite harsh to change that, because that would affect the business in its general running. But I think if the bamboo was removed and adequate screening was put in to make it blend in so you wouldn't see it, like false cladding as you've got on the side and the front of the building there, just to raise it slightly so it's hidden, that would go in part to make it blend in and you wouldn't have to paint it. I think the bamboo takes time to grow, and therefore it's, I don't know why they've done that, maybe the ecology side, the green side, but I think it's harsh to refuse it, but I think the adequate cladding should be made to obscure it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't have anyone else who wanted to comment, so I'm going to take a moment of a Chair's privilege to make my own comment. I am very concerned at the maintenance of bamboo on the roof. I'm also quite concerned at the appearance, which actually just looks like it could be weeds growing up there. I appreciate it's probably bamboo. So it's to agree with actually Councillor Moore and the concerns raised by Councillor Matterface. I think there should be some alternative type of screening than what is there. I'm sorry, there is no comment available from the gallery, no. Okay, Councillor Wing.
I just want to try and reiterate, they put a planning application in to build an extension with an internal flue, and they haven't done that. So by going against the officer's wishes, are we undermining the planning process?
Okay, anyone else? No, okay. In that case, we need to put the motion for the officer's recommendation for refusal to the vote. Those in favour of the officer's recommendation? And those against?
Abstentions.
Any abstentions?
So
Thank you.
3, 1, 9, 4.
That's me, yeah. I was 4.
Obviously, 10. Oh no, I counted you.
Right.
10, 9.
So the officer's recommendation is carried for refusal.
Sorry, do you want to say the numbers?
And the number, sorry, the numbers?
9 in favour.
9 in favour, 3 against, and one abstention. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is item 4F, 22 Grosvenor Road. Speaking in favour of the application, I have Mr Beaumont. 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'm Mike Beaumont, the owner of the Four Candles microbrewery in St Peters. I've been granted permission for a modest extension to our cold store building in Grosvenor Road. My application is only for a pitched roof to the building to replace the sloping corrugated one that we have at the moment. Everything else has been agreed. The pitched roof would allow for extra storage space to make the building more useful to us. This building is in a street of Victorian semi-detached buildings, all of which have pitched roofs. Planning officers say that the pitched tiled roof that we propose on our building would be dominant and discordant with the street view. How can this be so? The only flat roofs are on the two lock-up garages further up on the same side of the road. I've asked local residents what they think, and every one of the 66 people who have signed my petition have agreed that it would look far better with a pitched roof. The planning officers claim that the pitch roof would detract from views of the neighbouring Christchurch. This is not the view of Dr. Watson, who's the church's minister, who fully supports my application for a pitched roof. And I have his permission to quote him here. He says, "I have no worries at all. It's at the rear of the church and will not make any difference to us. The front of the church is more important. The neighbouring houses at the front, that's on the Osborne Road side of the church, the houses and flats are 3 stories high and all have pitched roofs. I have the unanimous support of the Broadstairs Town Council for the pitched roof, as well as the residents I've mentioned, and you're welcome to look at their comments and signatures on the petition. And I would ask you to support this tonight, please.
Thank you. That's it. The Planning Applications Manager will now outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. So the application site is in red. The main issues for members to consider are the impact on the character and appearance of the area, the benefits that have been put forward by the applicant in terms of the economic benefits of the increase in the storage of the unit, and then other material planning considerations, including previous decisions made by the council and inspector decisions. So this is the site is actually, that's the church that's got the red dot on it, but this is the area of Grosvenor Road. So to pick up the points that were raised in terms of the character of the area, as you can see, you have 2-storey pitched roof properties all the way around this collection of single-storey buildings that stretch from the left-hand side of the image all the way to the application site, which is the one with the black roof here next to the church. So to go down to street view, this is the building in question next to the church. And this is a view from a bit further back, so you can see the church behind it. And then this is the view the other side. So the issue here, as you will seen from the report, comes from the inspector's decision on a previous proposal. Now, I will show the previous proposals, and the decision was made in relation to a full 2-storey building. But what the inspector's decision did identify is something particular about this character of the area. and I'm going to read it out as it's in the report as well as a quote. Despite being something of an anomaly in the street scene, the existing office building is visually unassuming in the street scene. The lack of dwellings fronting the road in this area and the small-scale, unobtrusive and low-rise built formal development here gives a relatively open character to this part of Grosvenor Road, with notable separation between the front of Grosvenor Road properties and the rear elevations of Osborne Road. Whilst the quality of the existing office building or the garage and outbuildings is not particularly high, the arrangement gives a spatial feel to the road which forms a key part of its existing character. So this is the elevations of the existing building. So you can see it's a single story with a mono-pitch roof. So the inspector was talking about this proposal for a two-story house, which was refused and was dismissed at appeal. Then a subsequent application was also refused by the council for a two-story property on the site, again on the basis of the first floor addition that was being made following the inspector's decision on the 2016 application. And then we come to the approval on the site. So this was approved to allow for an increase in the footprint of the site, but not to go up. So looking at the floor plan, you can see that there was a front extension and a change in the design of the front elevation to allow the store to be extended. And that was considered by the council to not result in any harm to the character of the area, because the main issue the inspector had raised was about basically a first floor and this increased scale of the building. Sorry, this is just the other elevation of what was approved. So this is the design of the current proposal, but it's also exactly the same design of the 2022 application that was refused because of the impact on the street scene by the council. So the reason for refusal is identical to the previous reason for refusal that's put before members, because whilst we've considered the additional information that's been provided, it's not considered that the economic benefits outweigh the reason given previously to refuse the application. So it's considered, if I move on to the block plan specifically, so you can see that you have a pitched roof, and in terms of the argument about there are pitched roofs in the area, the applicant's demonstrating it there on the plan. This is more about the increased scale, because what we're talking about is the first floor within the pitched roof. Specifically, you've got the issue of obviously the relationship with the church. It's clearly not as significant as if it was a full two-story property, but you can see that the ridge height is above the top of the parapet. This is set back, so if you look at this, you can see that the pitched roof bit in the middle is here. The front elevation is set back, set in front here for the church, so it's set back. However, obviously, as you saw from the images, the whole side elevation is obviously flint, and again, the inspector specifically talked about the church and the views of the church along the road being quite significant in terms of actually contributing to the character of the area. We've previously refused a first floor addition here 3 times. It is considered that the creation of a first floor there would be out of keeping with this stretch, specifically as identified by the inspector. As I mentioned, it's an identical design of what we've already refused. And officers are concerned about the residential appearance that's being created, and that it would, it has the potential, whilst it's adjacent to a larger building, it does have a potential to erode that spacious character and diminish it to the extent that, we'd have to look at every proposal that came forward for other plots along there on their own merits, but obviously this would go against the specific character identified by the inspector, and therefore it is recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation for refusal is adopted. Can the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. So we will now debate in the usual way. I have Councillor Garner first.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr Livingstone, for the report. I called this in. I'm not the councillor for this ward, but I am the councillor for St Peter's ward, in which the Four Candles sits. And then, as the applicant said, it is a thriving business. I don't have to declare an interest because I'm not a drinker. I don't drink alcohol, so I don't frequent the business, but I live quite close to it, and I can see that it is a busy, thriving, growing business. So I called this in to Broadstairs as a Peters Town Council for discussion and consideration, because as we've heard with other Broadstairs and St Peters applications, we take very seriously the impact on surrounding area when considering proposals. So I thought it was right and proper that we considered whether this would have, they thought, this would have an adverse impact on the area, and they unanimously decided that they thought it wouldn't. And I agree with them. I don't think it does. There are three, right at the start of Mr Livingstone's presentation, he mentioned three considerations that we should consider. The first, I think, was around the impact on the area, and I think we've seen, although this building and the building next to it don't have pitched roof, the area that is surrounded by pitched roofs, and pitched roofs higher than the pitched roof here. So I don't think that is necessarily a reason for refusal. Do the economic benefits outweigh the application? And I think there are economic benefits. We need to be supporting small businesses, as has been mentioned previously, in the area, and I think this will enable the small businesses that is quite successful to grow. And whether there are any other considerations, I don't believe. I mean, the one other consideration that was mentioned was the refusal of a similar but not the same previous application for a taller house than this is. And where obviously we do have to consider that, I don't believe that it outweighs the benefit of allowing this proposal. So obviously I'm looking forward to hearing from any other members of the committee about this, but I think I would be minded to not support the officer's recommendation and ask for this application to be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Keane.
Thank you. This isn't a question or anything. Can you go back and show me again the two previous applications, but then, yeah, so the one after that, the one that was less. So that was the second one. Yeah, okay. And now can you go back to what is there now? The actual photo. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I just want...
Councillor Moore.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This site has been before us on numerous occasions, and each time it was for a residential property, or gave the impression that it was going to be residential accommodation. And I think that was the main reason why BTSP was refusing it in the first instance. I agree with Councillor Garner that we should be supporting local businesses, and I think as long as the planning has a restriction on it that this is not to be used for habitable accommodation of any kind, and only for storage as a commercial enterprise, I would have thought on this instance, with the extra space that they've got, that would benefit them, and I would then be in favour of supporting the applicant as long as it was only for commercial use, and so therefore it has a condition on it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So the property wouldn't benefit from permitted development rights if granted for the current use, because it would be granted after the permitted development rights came in, because the government introduced something that means you can't game the system by doing a PD change after the event, if you see what I mean. The issue is that once the scale of the property is established, then obviously a subsequent application to consider whether or not that is changed into residential could be made, but it would be a planning permission that we would then look at things like quality of accommodation, size of accommodation, but it would have obviously, this would establish the scale of the building that is permitted on the scheme. On the site.
Sorry, was there another hand? Yes, so Councillor Bayford.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I agree with the previous speakers. I think that the slight increase in bulk is far outweighed by the economic benefits of the application. I think it's a great improvement on what's been the applications that have been made before, and I really can't really agree with the officer's recommendation to refuse. Thank you.
Councillor Wing.
Mr Livingstone, could you just confirm, because it does look like a house, although it said it's a story, it looks like a house. It's got a front door and a garage and a window at the top, which would clearly could be a bedroom. If this was approved, further down the line, could they apply for change of use?
There's nothing to preclude an application coming in. The main thing here is we obviously aren't considering it being a dwelling, but the visual appearance is something that is under consideration. Obviously, as I say, I must admit, because we don't need to, there's no requirement for us to look at the issue of how much internal floor space there is, whether or not there's adequate outlook, if it's a two-bed property, does it have play space, all that stuff. We haven't looked at it, we haven't assessed it, so I can't speak to that. It's more about the scale of the first floor that's our concern.
Any other? Councillor Alban.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've just got to disagree with Councillor Bayford. She said it's a slight increase in bulk. I think it's more than a 50% increase in bulk. And that's all I wanted to say. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Matterface.
I just wanted to ask, could you go back to the photograph with the building next to the church? The other way, yeah. At the moment, it's obvious, yeah, that'll be fine. It's set quite a long way back from the rear of the church, isn't it? So there can be no change there, and it's got parking space, which is quite a novelty there. So it's only going to be going up. It's not coming forward at all.
So a single storey element is coming forward of this. So basically the pitched roof goes on top of the existing structure, which includes the first floor within it. And then you have the extension which has been approved as a flat roof extension, which basically removes the white van parking space, and that would have a smaller pitched roof on top. So it's obviously, this is the view in terms of, so you can imagine what's obviously changing there.
Do you want to go back to the other
Yeah, I'll go back just to show the elevations, sorry. So here we go. So front elevation here, so the bit on the left is and then this is the side elevation, actually as if you're standing on the church. You can see the front bit there coming out.
Okay, any other questions or comments? In that case, we'll now put the motion for the officer's recommendation for refusal to the vote. Those in favour of refusing this application? And those against? Includes me.
So 2 in favour, 7 against and 4 abstaining.
So the officer's recommendation is lost. And I'll hand back to Mr Livingstone for the next step.
Thank you, Chair. So if members are minded to approve the application, then specific grounds have to be given as to why it is being approved in this instance. Obviously, it has been mentioned about the specific benefits, economic benefits of the expansion of the business, and that would outweigh the impact on the character of the area. I would suggest if it's being approved, obviously we would look for safeguarding conditions, specifically, for example, with regards to materials that are to be used, and that we would have a look at the samples of those materials. And it would be for a member to propose a motion to approve with those reasons, or any other reasons that they consider outweigh the officer recommendation.
Councillor Bayford? And a seconder? And in that case, those in favour?
Sorry, who's the seconder?
Oh, sorry, it was Councillor Garner.
Okay.
Any against?
I didn't get that, sorry. You moved
Oh.
too quickly.
Sorry, I was a bit too quick there. Those in favour? And those against? And abstentions?
11-1-1.
Thank you. That's in favour of that to 11-1-1. Thank you.
Can you just remind everyone of the previous vote?
Yeah. And just to say that the loss, the loss of the officer's original recommendations was 2 in favour, 7 against, with 4 abstentions. I'm just going to suggest we take a 5-minute comfort break if anyone wants to nip out, stretch their legs or whatever. Thank you, and we'll be back in 5 minutes. can we reconvene, please? Thank you, Councillor Alban, for returning. It is much appreciated. So, if everyone's ready, this is agenda item 4G, the Royal at 51 Harbour Place, Ramsgate. Speaking under Council Rule 20.1, we have Councillor Austin. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. This application, I'm speaking on behalf of myself as a ward councillor, but also trying to reflect the views of Ramsgate Town Council on this matter and those residents who've been in touch recently to express their concerns about it. This application got a bit lost, I think, during the purdah period and local election period, so it hasn't been as much publicised as I would have expected it to be. So therefore, there are not many objections on the portal, but there have been quite a lot of emails back and forth since it was featured in the Isle of Thanet News this week. I would like to point out that we are fully in favour of Thorley Taverns. They're an excellent local employer, and there's a lot of good things about this application. We're quite happy with the fact that there are plenty of other amenities in the area and that losing the public house is not a problem. We are delighted to see the use of a brownfield site for flats, and some of the sustainability measures and so on are excellent. We don't, in principle, object to the modern design, and we understand the concerns that have been expressed about pastiche. However, this is a revised set of plans, and I believe, many residents believe, and many Ramsgate Town councillors believe, this proposal is still too large and obtrusive. It is not in keeping, and we are very concerned that it will have a damaging effect on the seafront of the only royal harbour in the country. The conservation officer starts by saying the Royal Hotel is situated in an incredibly prominent location, central to Ramsgate Conservation Area and opposite the harbour. I don't think it's an incredibly prominent location, but I think what is incredible is the idea that we can allow as large and obtrusive a development as is proposed here. There is reference in the documentation, which is extensive, to the various elements of the local plan which require new development not to detract from the immediate or wider landscape. The primary aim of new development is to promote and reinforce local character and provide high quality and inclusive design. Proposals should therefore relate to surrounding development. The most worrying aspect from my point of view, and I'm sure this is about technical terminology that I don't understand, but the Conservation Officer's report which says
although the scheme's presence is felt, I would not consider this harm to be more than substantial. I am astonished that as the custodians of the only royal harbour in the country, we are considering any form of harm, let alone harm that is no more than substantial. I believe, and various of my colleagues believe, that this application should go back to Thorley Taverns with a view to reducing the height of the building by 1 floor and reconsidering some of the aspects that the Thanet Heritage and Design Forum looked at. Most particularly, they say this location is worthy of far better treatment. I can put it no better myself.
Thank you. I will now hand over to the Planning Applications Manager to outline the report.
Thank you, Chair. The application site is here in red. So the proposal is for the change of use of the public house and 2 flats to a Class E commercial unit on ground floor with 8 flats, 8 new flats being proposed with the retention of the 2 flats. And that follows a 5-storey side extension, a roof extension to the existing building, and a 3-storey building to the rear, following demolition of side elements and building to the rear. So the main issues for consideration are the principle of development, the impact on the conservation area and the adjacent Grade 2 listed building, the impact on neighbours, and of course highway impacts as well as any other material planning considerations. So the site is marked in red. I think most members will know where this site is, on Harbour Parade, opposite the harbour, as mentioned by Councillor Austin. So this is a 3D just showing the building itself of the Royal, adjacent to the Royal Sailors' Rest. We then have the image on street level, and then set back. So this is a long stretch of development which is very prominent when you're travelling from the southwest, and we will look at views as well from the northeast, I suppose, on Madeira Walk as well. So this is just a bit of a closer view of the Royal itself at the moment. And this is the view up, sorry, it's Harbour Street. My brain froze there. On Harbour Street, so this is the return elevation, and we'll look at the elevations of this in a moment. And then you've got the listed building, and then you've got the side extension here. So as we'll see from the plans, this is the element to be demolished with the extension constructed within this gap. You've then got this view as well, which again shows that side element here, and then obviously the Royal in the background there. Now what we're going to do is have a little look at the rear. So this is again a 3D image looking down, so you can see there's a large collection of buildings to the rear. You have the sort of lighter grey section of building, which is part of this site, and then you also have this area to the north of that on the image, where there's a lot of plant equipment as well. That's also part of the site as well. So that is the section that's to be demolished. And then this is a view then looking on top of that light grey section towards that at the moment 2-storey structure with the chimney, which is to be demolished as part of this, and this is the site of the 3-storey structure to be developed at the rear. And so this is a view then from the image where, if you're here and you've got the harbour behind you and the building, obviously the Royal behind you, if you go to your left and look down, you can see that there is actually behind that red, sort of almost look like a fence, but it's the red structure on the left-hand side. You can see there's actually access to the building at the rear, just to give members an idea of that there is access to this building at the rear at the moment, but obviously that's proposed to be demolished. And then this is just a view back towards see the structure at the moment. So the existing floor plans show you've got quite a large expanse of building, which is a large part used for the Royal pub itself. So you've got basement and the ground floor plans there, all connected with the Royal, and then also the first floor plan on the left-hand side, which is also connected with the Royal. And then you've got on the right-hand side, you've got one of the residential units, which is at second floor level, and then you've got this unit at the moment, which is within the the top floor of the property. So, in terms of the principle of development, as already mentioned, the site is a brownfield site. This is proposing 8 new units. Obviously, as members are very aware, council cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of housing land. Therefore, any contribution to the need to provide housing has to be given significant weight in weighing up the determination of the application. So that is the sort of starting point. The loss of the public house is considered in the report under policy CMO2. Our view, as put forward by the applicant as well, is that there are multiple public houses in the vicinity, and therefore the loss of this pub wouldn't result in a significant reduction in community facilities in the area. So the principle of development and the loss to provide a commercial unit, and it's acceptable as a commercial unit because it's in the town centre area, so we need that primary frontage still at ground floor. That's obviously what they're proposing. But there's no end user identified yet, but the principle of developing for that is acceptable. So in terms of the actual design itself, as mentioned, it is a contemporary design. It proposes to use modern metal cladding that is aiming to blend between the red tile-hung building on the left-hand side rather than adopting as mentioned, a pastiche approach with the Royal Sailors' Rest on the left-hand side. You can see at the top of the building the red dotted line, which was the previous height as submitted. The roof and that extension was higher. That was reduced, obviously following officers stating that it needed to reduce because it was coming too high against the listed building. Now, obviously, we've talked a bit about contemporary design before at committee. Obviously, those of you that were here prior to the election will remember the Belgrave Road application. And obviously, the materials are quite a key point about how development comes forward on a site like this. To come to Councillor Austin's point with regards to the Conservation Officer's perspective on it, the wording specifically mentioned there is less than substantial harm. That's the specific wording in the MPPF. So within the MPPF, what it talks about is obviously significant weight has to be given to any impact on a designated heritage asset. So conservation area or indeed listed building, any impact has to be taken and given quite a bit of weight, or great weight, I think is the exact wording. However, there are levels of harm which are delineated in the MPPF. Substantial harm is you're demolishing a listed building. It's that level of harm is what we're talking about. And the specific reason why that wording is used is because if there is harm to a conservation area or a listed building, whilst there is a statutory duty for the council to try and preserve the character of conservation area or listed building, the MPPF mandates that we are required to consider public benefits against any less than substantial harm. So that's the reason why that is the test under the MPPF. So obviously in looking at this proposal and the fact that it does take on a modern design and it does fill in the gap and go above the roof of the existing property, does create an impact on the area. It is a change, it is an additional mass, and that obviously has to be considered against those benefits I mentioned about brownfield development and 8 flats in this instance. So just to go through some of the other materials and issues on this one, obviously you can see that there are inset balconies on the left-hand side here. So these aren't balconies that protrude, it's that they are actually, as you'll see from the floor plans, they're inset. You've also got roof lights which are set flush within the proposed roof slope. There are some 3D visualizations which are used for representation only, but they give you a bit more of an idea because, from the eaves height, this roof is pitching back. This is not a flat entity at the top at roof level. So looking at the side elevation, again, this is a roof that would, you can see that the only element that's changing here in terms of the roof extension is that what will happen here is the mansard roof that's currently in place would basically continue to extend up. And if I go back, you'll be able to see this. So you can see on the right-hand side of the image, you can see the mansard roof here goes up at a very high angle, and that would just continue with the roof extension as proposed in terms of the metal-clad roof. You also have a change in so much as there is a dormer window that's being added on the corner, as well as a new roof light that's being put in there. all the existing windows at first floor, all the existing windows are being basically retained within the Royal itself. Then looking at the rear elevation of the front building, so this is showing, so where we were looking from is on the left-hand side of the image. You can see again where that mansard goes up to the point. Again, you can see that dotted line about how the roofs come down, and you can see how that roof at the rear is sort of full height. So it's not pitching away at the rear, it's just a full height 5-storey, whereas at the front, as you'll see from the 3D, those top 2 stories are pitching away from the street. But you can see there's a bit of a change in materials here. You've also got these 2 bay windows specifically that are put forward for secondary bedrooms. These have windows on the side rather than a window on the back, so you can't look out from those windows, but you've got views and light coming through the side. And so we'll look at that on the floor plan as well. So then what we're going to look at as well is the rear building. So the gap here that you can see is a rear courtyard that's being proposed to be created. So this is to provide effectively a gap between the ground floor, first floor and second floor accommodation of the rear building with the building at the front, which is why you have those sort of bay windows that are designed as they are on the back of the front building, as we've just seen. There's also, as you can see on the left-hand side here, there is a connecting section to provide more accommodation for one of the flats at the rear. But just to give you the elevations of this building at the rear, actually, sorry, there's the 3D here. So we're now looking, as you can see, towards the harbour, but on a 3D image. So we're looking the other way. So the photos that we saw on top of the roof were from the grey roof here, looking back. So you can see you've got a very heavily built up area at the rear here. And one of the key issues that we've been looking at is, what happens when you increase the height of the structure that's there by an additional storey. What they are proposing to do is to create a partially covered terrace area. So the image on the left is if you are standing, I suppose, on the properties in Harbour Street. So building at the front is on your left-hand side in that image, and then you're seeing the elevation there. So there's a partially covered roof terrace, and you may see there's a condition on which is requiring details of some screening to be put up along there to avoid there being any impact on the first floor or windows of the property on Harbour Street. But you can see then on the right-hand side, this is the front elevation of the rear building. So this is what faces that back elevation of the front building. You can again see where there's a slight change in the bulk because of where they've put the roof terrace here. So it's not full, the whole section is not fully 3-storey, but the bottom 2 floors are really mimicking the scale of the development that's there at the moment, but obviously they've had to accommodate windows for the accommodation. So to move through the floor plans, you have the basement, which is serving the commercial area. So then you've got the commercial area on the sort of main body of the Royal building, as it is, with the steps going down internally into that basement. Then you have 2 entrances to get to the flats, one on Harbour Street and one on Harbour Parade. You have the bin storage that's directly accessible from the road. Just to be clear, there's a condition that would be proposed on here, which would mean that the bin storage doors have to open inwards rather than outwards as shown in this plan, because you can't go over the highway. But then what you have is the courtyard at the rear here, and then you have 3 units in total in that rear building. So one of those units is on the left-hand side here, and one of the issues that we were looking at when seeking amendments is to ensure there's enough adequate light and outlook for the accommodation created. So this is a 1-bed unit. It hits the nationally described space standards. They have added some screening internally to try and avoid there being a direct privacy impact. This obviously isn't a visual issue, and that's why obviously there's a bit of a distinction between the cases that we've had earlier about the visual impact of a landscape. This is about actually providing a sort of almost a delineation of private space, but also an alleviation of privacy. There is an element of buyer beware here, but obviously we are conscious that we don't want to approve substandard accommodation. We do think that with the combination of the window arrangement that they've got and the landscaping, that flat specifically is sufficient in terms of the living conditions that will be created. Then at the rear, you've also got part of a maisonette, which if you stay with the rear building here, includes a more accommodation on the right-hand side of this rear building. You've then got some stairs that came up from the ground floor that provide first floor accommodation for the other unit, the last unit at the rear, And then I'm going to go up to the next plan to just talk about that rear unit. And then you have the rest of the accommodation for the rear unit. Now, if we go back to the front building, if I go back to the first floor, so this is where it gets a bit more straightforward. You've got 2 units on each floor. This is effectively where you are, they're replacing the units that were there. There were 2 units on the upper floors. But then you've got 2 units on the first floor, primary outlook to the front over the harbour. Then you've got second floor plan, again, similar arrangement, 2 units, primary outlook over the harbour. Similar arrangement on the third floor, 2 units, primary outlook over the harbour. And then there's the roof accommodation. So what you can see here is that the roof accommodation doesn't extend to the very front of the building, because you can see it on this floor plan here. You've actually got the roof part, which is where it's sloping back. But this is all 1 unit on the top of the property. So again, all of these units accord with the nationally described space standards. They are all spacious and they are considered to have suitable light and outlook provided. So in terms of perspective views, so these are given as representations, and obviously what would be approved are the elevations. Just to be absolutely clear, these are 3D renders. They're not going to be, they're not scalable, but we do think they give an impression of the extent of the building and the extent of the development. And as mentioned, the key issue is the impact on the conservation area and the adjacent listed building. So to give members some context, and I'm sure Ramsgate members will know this. Obviously, the Royal building itself is obviously not a historic building as the Royal Sailors' Rest is. The Royal Sailors' Rest previously extended over the site of the Royal. The Royal is therefore a relatively new building in the conservation area. Obviously, they're not proposing to demolish that building, and that was obviously a very specific sort of start to the design that they look to do. And obviously then the issue is, how do you develop around that building if you are going to provide more accommodation there, and obviously which has then informed the design that they've come up with for something more contemporary. Now, I do think it's important to state that obviously the grain of the elevation is simply not shown in this perspective, because obviously you've seen from the elevations the fact that these are panels of metal cladding, so they are broken up rather than being shown as one homogeneous colour on this. But the main thing here to look at in terms of the issue that's identified within the Conservation Officer's comment is about the scale of the roof extension, and specifically the fact that obviously the height has been reduced. But obviously what we're looking at is it significantly harmful in terms of the impact on the listed building? So the fact that there is a side elevation that's exposed to the listed building at the moment, as if we go back here, is an important factor. However, obviously, historically, as I mentioned, that is simply not what the Royal Sailors' Rest looked like. So we do consider that you could develop something in that gap, and that the principle of that sort of development would sit comfortably within the conservation area. It's just about whether or not the design and scale of this building is acceptable as a contemporary addition, rather than trying to adapt to the design of the buildings either side, but paying regard to the material palette. So one of the other issues that we raised a concern about related to the view from Madeira Walk, because whilst it's not maybe as prominent as the views around the harbour, it is still, when you're in both Albion Gardens but also coming down Madeira Walk, you really can see that side elevation of the Royal, and you can see the top of the chimneys of the listed building. So this was an issue in terms of what was obscured. Do you obscure the actual chimneys of the listed building by doing this? From looking at the elevations and considering those scale drawings, the view of those chimneys specifically is still to be retained. So again, that sort of, I suppose, dominance of that height is still sustained as part of the character of the area in our view, by doing the proposal. So this is a situation where it is an unbalanced approval recommendation, defer and delegate for approval subject to the SAM's contribution being secured through a legal agreement. We do think that there is an appropriate balance struck here between the design, the conservation area and the listed building, and the provision of 8 units in a highly sustainable brownfield site. And therefore the recommendation is to defer and delegate for approval subject to conditions and, as I say, a legal agreement for that SAM's contribution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I move that the officer's recommendation for deferral and delegate is approved. Would the Vice Chair please second?
Seconded.
Thank you. And do I have any speakers? Councillor Orban.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is a push you, pull you kind of thing, you know. I think the contrast. I'm not particularly against the contrast of the materials against the listed building. It was just the bulk at the top of the building, at the top of the extension, which in my humble opinion is too high. I just thought that needed to come down to the level of the current roof of the Royal, and that's what concerns me. The buildings at the back, everything like that, not a problem. I go along with what Councillor Austin has said as well. So the development itself, and I've got no problem with having a development there and having that extension. I just believe that it's just that bit too high, and you know, and as has been said, conservation of area right adjacent to a listed structure, you know, and we do make a lot of noise about affecting listed buildings when dealing with planning applications. So I'm having difficulty with this because of the height, and that's purely the only thing that I really have a difficulty with. Thank you.
Councillor Makinson.
I don't have any difficulties with it. I find the Royal building very lumpish, not terribly attractive, not enhanced by the existing signage on it. I think it's very important that we use these little infill sites, brownfield sites, to provide more housing. And I'm not worried about the height. I don't think you'll be aware of it from the street. The building to the other side, to the east, is much more attractive than the Royal building, which, as the planning officer says, is quite a recent building. And I think it's quite right that they use entirely different materials, as they do in places like Italy, where they're building up against quite a lot of old classical buildings to not pastiche them. So I would support this. Thank you.
Councillor Wing.
I mean, I agree, there's a continuous frontage there apart from that gap. So your natural instinct is to put something in there when you've got the opportunity to do so. But I think the gap's too, and I'm very much a supporter of modern designs coming into conservation areas, because I think it's about creating new heritage for the future and not just trying to recreate what we've already got there. And I agree that the Royal building, it's not a particularly great looking building at presently, but I just think the gap is too small, and I just find that modern infill hideous, I have to say, whether it's the scale of the height on it, whether it's the fact that there isn't any symmetry or linking. It's meant to be part of the building, but I don't see how. There's no signature apart from the colour of the building to link it there. It's going to stick out like a sore thumb on that seafront, I have to say. And I'm really confused about the consistency with which we approve or disapprove things, because we've just taken umbrage over an extractor fan on top of a building in Broadstairs. Well, this is a damn sight bigger than an extractor fan, and I think we should be sending it back, and we maybe should be looking at some of the advice that the Heritage Forum having Ramsgate. I'm all in favour of the infill. I think it's a great idea. I think it's a positive move because that area is looking a bit down at the moment. The other concern I've got is that if we do approve, there's already 2 significant builds on Harbour Street going on, and the chaos it's creating with delivery of materials, removal of materials, scaffolders being present, is quite difficult. So I'd like to think that there would be some sort of management of the building, of the actual process of building this building in such a prime location, because it is going to create quite a lot of disturbance.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back on a couple of those points. Yeah, it's proposed for a construction management plan condition. There's also another condition which would require measures to protect the listed building during construction as well, which is obviously incredibly important for this. I think just to come back on, I think obviously the 2 applications that you mentioned, it's not a comparison, obviously. Naturally, all scales, I think, is the main thing, I would say, and it's obviously every case on its own merits, but I appreciate the point you're making.
Councillor Ozeki.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, looking at this, I don't have great difficulties with it. I think the Royal wasn't a fantastic building in the beginning, and as you said, it is actually a lot more modern than the building to the left of it. But if we go even further over to the left of that building, we find a travel lodge and a very modern building, etc. So I can't see that there's a big issue with that. I think that you know, frontages will change, things will modernise slightly. No, I'll be probably supporting this. Thank you.
Anyone else? So I would like to make my own comments as one of the councillors, as an Eastcliff councillor, very much close to our ward. I broadly like it, but I do think that the changes that have been made to the outside of the Royal have taken away from it fitting in with the heritage area, and it's making it look rather bland compared to what is round to the right from here. I'm happy with the height, but I would like the infill to be maybe a little bit lower, although I'm quite happy with that. So my inclination is, and I think someone else said it just now, is to send it back. In other words, to send it back and come back to us with perhaps some of the concerns that we've raised to be addressed. That's my view. Thank you. Does anyone else have anything else to add after that? In which case, we will now put the motion for the officer's recommendation, which was to defer and delegate to the vote. Those in favour of defer and delegate?
9. Are you 10?
9.
9, yeah.
Right. And against?
Are you against?
And I'm for.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm against.
Oh. Don't need to do abstentions because that's 9 and 4.
Right. So that's carried. Thank you.
9 and 4. So, do you want to just say the numbers again?
Sorry?
Do you want to just say the numbers again?
Sorry, the numbers again are 9 in favour, 4 against, and there's got to be an abstention in there.
That's 13, isn't it? No, it's 13.
14. 1 abstention.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and 1 abstention. Thank you. That concludes the public speaking for this meeting. I will now call upon the clerk to read out the remaining planning applications. If a member wishes to reserve an application, will they please call out as the clerk reads? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So we have AO2, Winter Gardens, Fort Crescent, Margate. AO3, which is also Winter Gardens, Fort Crescent, Margate. AO4, Ramsgate Bowling Club, Bowling Greens, Royal Esplanade, Ramsgate. And RO7, Kiosk at Royal Victoria Pavilion, Harbour Parade, Ramsgate.
Thank you. Can I have a proposer to move that the applications that have not been reserved be determined in accordance with the officer recommendations? Councillor Orban and seconder Councillor Bayford. Do members agree? And thank you. So for the benefit of the public, I will call upon the clerk to read out the applications that have been determined.
Thank you, Chair. So again, that's AO2, Winter Gardens, Fort Crescent, Margate. AO3, Winter Gardens, Fort Crescent, Margate. AO4, Ramsgate Bowling Club, Bowling Greens, Royal Esplanade, Ramsgate. And R07, Kiosk at Royal Victoria Pavilion, Harbour Parade, Ramsgate. Thank you.
So that concludes the business for this meeting. Thank you for your attendance and good night.